Tony, I've seen a lot of interviews with you over the years. I've heard a lot of your talking about your songwriting and stuff. And one of the things I really wanted to touch on is something you said in an interview about writing for yourself versus chasing the radio. I wanted to
Yeah.
really flesh this out because that is the dilemma, right? Because I mean, ultimately, in order to make money and a living doing what you love, you have to chase the radio. But chasing the radio can ultimately lead you to never being heard, right?
Well, yeah, and also I've always believed this. Uh, we have a finite amount of time here on this earth, and I, I I just as soon spend it doing something that is brings a certain amount of peace to you, as opposed to only feeling as though you've been validated is if somebody else does it or likes it. Uh, I tell people all the time, my favorite song of all time, Chris, all time, and always will be, was written probably, I don't know, it got to be almost 100 years ago, I'm guessing, um, or it seems like it has. Maybe that's just how old I am. But it was George and Ira Gershwin wrote a song called "They Can't Take That Away from Me," and that has been my belief, my mantra, my entire songwriting career. Uh, maybe nobody's going to do this. Maybe nobody's going to hear it. Maybe nobody's going to like it. But they can't take away the fact that I enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed the process of seeing a song through and having that song mean enough to me to want to go out and play it and want people to hear it, whether anything else comes of it or not. Um, if the only thing that you ever do something for is to have somebody say, "Man, that's great," or "I want to cut that," then it's probably not the right business for you. I think you have to ultimately come at it from the standpoint of this is who I am and what I do. I told you earlier, I worked for that magazine, and it had nothing to do with music. That magazine that I worked for was a trade publication.
Wow.
It dealt with it dealt with buses, and yeah. Uh, so, uh, but I met a lot of good people, and I learned a lot of things. I actually learned how a magazine gets put together. I actually learned the stuff I didn't learn in college, and I had some of my greatest successes while I was working for that magazine. I mean, songs got picked up, and I got a lot of songs recorded back in that day, and so I also believe that I'm glad we're having this interview and you're talking to me as a songwriter, and I appreciate that very much. But if I'd still be a songwriter whether you knew any of these songs or not. That's
Of
that's
course.
the point.
Yeah.
And so when I worked for a magazine, and I had to wear tie and run around and run a bus rodeo and stuff like that, I didn't think I was any less of a songwriter. I just figured I was hopefully making some contribution to our family, you know, and because Jamie had carried the weight, and I was hoping I was bringing a little bit more to the table back then, and so I've never thought you have to lead some lifestyle or adopt some persona, or it's just if you write, that's what you do, and it doesn't matter what else you do.
So I got to tell people out there, I am not a songwriter, never will be. I can barely click a pen in rhythm, but this is probably projection on my part. But I'd love to hear it from your standpoint. I would imagine that two of the biggest compliments as a songwriter would one is that what I want to talk about here, and a second one in a little while. But the first one is for an artist, whoever it is, doesn't matter, to repeatedly pick up your songs. They get the first cut. They love it so much. Let's call Tony. Oh well, we need a song for this record. Call Tony. And there's three artists, major artists, with Garth Brooks, Patty Loveless, Leroy Parnell. They've all repeatedly gone back to the Tony Arata well. This has to be a huge compliment to you, right?
Well, of course it is, and those are three really wonderful artists. Uh, but what I really appreciated was all three of them weren't didn't call me and go, "Hey, you got anything that sounds like so and so?" Or they knew they weren't going to get uh, the usual from me. And true to form, a lot of songs that Garth cut, I don't know that anybody else would have touched them. Um, I remember what Resistance with a song that Patty did of mine. It was called "Long Stretch of Lonesome."
Oh man.
There's some real colloquial terms in there that I heard my mama use, and you know, everybody said, "Well, I don't even know what that means." And so they came not looking necessarily for a repeat of what had just happened, like Patty with "Here I Am" or Garth with "The Dance" or Leroy with "A Hold of My Own." They were looking for, what am I missing? What do you like? Don't pitch me what you think I need to hear for me. Tell me what you like. I want to hear what you like. So I got to play a very a lot of my songs are quirky, I guess, for lack of a better term. In some capacity, they don't necessarily follow any formula that happens to be popular on the radio at any given time. But they were as real as I could write them, and I think that's what these artists came to look for.
Yeah, because typically, as somebody on the outside, typically when you see that relationship, it's usually because they're a co-writing tandem. You know, like Scotty
Right,
Emmerich with Toby Keith, Buddy Cannon with
right,
Willie Nelson. This is not that. These songs were, for the most part, written solely by you, and it's not just Garth, Patty, and Leroy. We got Susie Boggess and Jim Glazer,
right.
and they repeatedly go back. You look at Tony Arata's discography, and it's repeated songs over and over. That's just a huge thing, I feel.
Well, you don't have to look any further than how successful how well it worked for people like George Strait.
Yep.
I mean, I don't even know how many Dean Dillon songs he's done, but you know, if you've had success with somebody, it only makes sense to say, "What else you got?"
Hmm.
If I were an artist, I think I'd go, "Well, that worked out pretty well. Let's hear some more stuff."
Yeah,
But
quick
he's a
dial
great.
is what we used to call it back in the day, right? Quick
What's
dial.
that?
Keep
Yeah.
that
No,
number on quick dial.
oh yeah. Well, that's what I joke. I've got an old Martin that the only reason I have it is because my dear friend Scott Kinsey was the right-hand man for George Gruen here in town. And usually when an old Martin comes in, they don't even take it out of the case. They just call Vince Gill, because they know he'll be interested in it.
Hmm.
But in this case, he stuck it underneath his desk and called Jamie and said, "You may want to think about this one for Tony for Father's Day or something like that." So you're right. You go back to the well. You know the sure calls. Um, but I'm so grateful that when people do go back to the well, you get a chance to play them something that maybe they would have never heard otherwise, because it's completely counter to the one they just did. Uh, when I got asked to come to a guitar pull for Patty, she was looking for the follow-up album to When Fallen Angels Fly. I mean, she won CMA Album of the Year, which was huge.
Yep.
So she got some of the writers that had been on that record together and say, "Play me something new." And it was at that first meeting that I got a chance to go do that I got to play "Someday I'll Lead the Parade" for her. And she took that song immediately and never let go. And it was the last song on that album, "Trouble with the Truth," and they cut it expressly, never thinking it was going to be a single or a hit, but just because it meant something to Patty, and and she wanted to sing it. Well, if all you're pitching somebody is what you think they want to put on the radio, it's going to limit what you're playing for them.
Absolutely will. Yeah.
I mean, the reason they're artists is because they're smart enough to know, or savvy enough to know, this would work real well for me. This speaks to me, and it'll be real easy for me to stand in front of a microphone and sing it because I believe it. So that was a chance meeting, and you know no matter what, the other thing about coming back, well, I've gotten to know these people as friends,
Right.
far more than just, artist or, um, the old I knew them when, and it's a completely different relationship. And I said earlier, when we first started out here, the relationships I've made as a result of nothing more than song, nothing more than music, would have been worth it if nothing else had ever come of it. Just for the people I've gotten to meet as a result of these songs, and the places I've gotten to go that I would have never seen.
So the
And
second compliment I wanted to talk about is, and we talked about it way earlier, is when a fabulous, iconic, legendary songwriter cuts one of your songs, takes one of your songs, puts it on their album when they could have very easily just written their own song or chosen one of their own. That's going to be a huge compliment as well. And I'm talking about Garth and Dolly and the Hal Ketchums, and I mean just great songwriters. You know.
oh, listen, that's a great point. I have got two brilliant, beautiful women as daughters, and I love them with every breath I take and with all my heart. But I've said this, and they know this for a fact. I've never once been thought of in their eyes as cool. I was dad or the old man or.
Yeah.
Yeah. But now listen, when I got to call them and tell them that Dolly Parton cut one of their dad's songs, it didn't last but about an hour. But for about an hour, I was cool, and yeah, that's like the pinnacle to me. I mean, not only as a songwriter, as an artist, as a human being, uh, you know, Dolly is in rare company. There's nobody like her, and
Yeah, it's Dolly and Willie, right? Like those two, man.
yeah. And sadly, with Chris's passing, we're the numbers now we're down to Dolly and Willie and Brenda Lee,
Hmm.
and from that era, and so it's uh, to have to have just to have heard Dolly sing one of your songs. I mean, I was like, okay, I'm done now.
Hmm.
I can go home. Uh, and there again, it's not a hit, but it doesn't matter to me. It was like the crowning achievement to me. Like you said very well, Chris, to have an iconic songwriter r- record one of your songs